Okay, thanks. So it's so fantastic to get to see, you know, like this year-long progression or many years progression of your work. But maybe you can take us back a little bit to when you were growing up. What do you think it was that drew you in the first place to doing those posters and then eventually to wood type and letterpress?
Oh, gonna get loud. Check. Early influences. Skateboarding was pretty much my introduction to graphic design. Really not even knowing that graphic design was an actual thing, kind of knowing that people made pictures to go on skateboards, and that was cool, and people took photographs of people skateboarding, and that was cool. But not really having awareness, I think, of any sort of career path in that. But paying attention to the design and the aesthetics there, and you know, fleeting interest in graffiti and all the stuff that kind of goes with being a skateboarder in the suburbs. And yeah, had looked at art school, but ended up going to more of a liberal arts place. And then really the exposure to some of the digital programs that were coming up at the time, or just becoming more accessible, was what kind of got me into paying more attention to design.
So how did you meet these first people who were, you know, in the community, I guess in Amherst, right, in the surrounding area? How did you first meet them and get interested in what they were doing?
So I had been screen printing for a while, and so out in Amherst, there's 5 colleges that you can kind of take classes at, all of them. And Mount Holyoke had a pretty decent screen printing facility, and so I'd go over there and use their screen printing room to do stuff. And I saw a poster for some type of workshop, actually the John Christensen of Firefly Press, who used to be located in Somerville, right around the corner from here. Orient myself, but he's right off of Dane Street, and I didn't even know that letterpress was a thing, and this poster didn't say anything about letterpress, it just said printing workshop, and so I just assumed it was screen printing. And so I looked up Firefly Press, and I was like, what are you doing? I had no knowledge of what letterpress was, but it looked super cool, and then was just looking at other stuff online and realized that, like I said before, Amherst is positioned in the Pioneer Valley, really close to Springfield, Holyoke, all these old paper towns that really the industrial history of them is around paper production and printing. A lot of that has fallen off in recent years, but it's kind of still in the blood of the area, and so there's a lot of artists that are still doing these forms of craft in a more contemporary way, or just the equipment was around and the space was around, and I think that just contributed to folks out there kind of continuing to do that type of work in a more artistic form. And so I just looked up, I think I emailed every letterpress printer in the valley. It was like, hey, can I come hang out? And some of them said no, or some of them said you can come by for 10 minutes, and then I eventually found one that let me come on as an apprentice for a whole semester, and that's kind of where the letterpress stuff picked up steam.
That's really cool. Yeah. So tell us about that apprenticeship. What was it like? What did you do? What did you learn?
Do people know? I realize I kind of skipped over what letterpress is, but it's a type of printing. If you've ever seen, that's cool. It's a bunch of tools on there. So traditional letterpress uses individual pieces of type that are put together to make words, to make sentences, paragraphs, pages. And this has been going on for hundreds of years. If you've ever seen any, period movies, newsies, whatever, that's kind of how things were done for a really long time. So my apprenticeship was with a guy who did mostly traditional letterpress printing, and my duties consisted a lot of putting the letters back in the drawers after they had been printed. That's a great kind of, yeah, you want to come hang out? How about it? So we'd listen to classical music, and he would print, and I would put things back, and once in a while he would let me run a press, and we'd kind of explain things as they were going, and gradually I was able to print things, and he was pretty good about letting me start to print my own stuff too, and he also had quite a good collection of the old wood type, which was the aesthetic that I was interested in. So a couple of those earlier posters were printed from this collection of type.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what kinds of stuff you were making at the time and how your approach changed or evolved as you were learning how to use this new craft.
Like in the very early, like in college, or?
Yeah, well, tell us about that, during that apprenticeship.
I mean, my approach changed just because I had access to a lot more stuff, and then had a very kind of lucky eBay score where I was able to acquire a really large amount of these wooden letters for an amount that a college senior could pay. The other thing was that in Chicopee, Massachusetts, which is also very close to the school, turns out to be the one guy like in the whole country, if not the world, that operates what amounts to a supply store for letterpress printing. It's called Letterpress Things. And he's open every other Saturday, and I could go and hang out with a bunch of old guys who have been doing printing for a long time. And eventually bought that small press that I showed from him. Found a bunch of type on eBay, was able to print my own thing. I mean, it was really like access to these physical objects that you needed. That dictates the design. Like when you're working with existing type, that dictates what you can make because you're working with physical objects. You can position them anywhere, you can use whatever color you want, but as far as the fonts that you use, you can't reduce by a point size or anything like it's there. So